Prologue. Storage Basement Level 2. The Louvre, Paris. Midnight. Maximine Beringer was getting very tired of sorting 18th century miniature portrait brooches. The Louvre, where he was a curator of Renaissance and early modern jewelry, had hundreds of the things, and he had looked at every single one of them. Sure, they were pretty. Tiny little portraits, often no larger than a postage stamp, delicately painted by hand and enclosed in crystal before being mounted on a gold setting. They showed ladies with powdered wigs and impossibly large hats, or brave-looking officers in fancy uniforms, or smiling children who looked too pale to have ever gone out and kicked a football around like his two little boys. They were delicate and expertly made, but more than a little dull after seeing a few hundred of them. Beringer was assisting with a new exhibition called France Before the Revolution, Courtly Style and Fashion of the Last Aristocratic Generation, one that should be popular with the tourists. As for Beringer, he was a socialist and heartily glad that France's high and mighty had gotten the chop. Too bad they weren't doing an exhibition on the guillotine. That would have satisfied both him and the tourists. Still, a job was a job. And if he wanted to take his wife and the boys on that vacation to Corsica next week, he needed to get his part of the exhibition sorted out. Hence the long shift late into the night. Beringer yawned. Time for another coffee. Setting aside the tray of brooches, 3 orderly rows of long-dead faces looking up at him, he headed over to the espresso machine by the stairwell at the other end of the floor. Beringer passed through silent rows of shelving, stacked high with protective boxes filled with everything from swords and gold tea sets to tri-cornered hats and landscape paintings. Beringer decided he really shouldn't complain. Despite his leftist leanings, he had always admired antiques and felt privileged to work in Europe's greatest institute of culture. A cup of espresso would improve his attitude. Just as he got to the espresso machine next to the stairwell door, he heard the sound of several hurrying feet, stomping down the stairs. Beringer stopped and frowned. Other than the security guards, no one was here at this hour, and no one had business coming to the lower storage levels. Even more surprising, they didn't stop at level 2, where he was, but continued down to level 3. No one went down to level 3. He had been working here 15 years and had never been there. He didn't know anyone at his pay scale level who had been down there. It was said the museum's richest treasures were kept on level 3, ones that were never shown to the public. Of course, when a large organization has a secret like that, it spawns all sorts of theories. The resident medievalist said it was full of plundered art from World War II that the museum didn't want to return. A janitor had solemnly told him they kept the pickled body of Catherine Monvoisin, France's famous 17th century fortune teller and poisoner, down there. Beringer didn't believe either of them, and leaned toward the opinion that level 3 simply contained some ugly but priceless artifacts, perhaps some rotted Egyptian mummies or bricks of gold hidden by Louis XVI before the revolutionaries executed him in 1793. All very interesting, but not worthy of showing to the public. Still, Beringer couldn't help but place a curious ear against the cool steel of the stairwell door. It sounded like a dozen people at least. A couple of them spoke in low tones. Too quiet to make out the words, but he swore it sounded foreign. Beringer suddenly felt nervous. What if it was a break-in? The voices and footsteps faded into the distance. They had definitely descended to level 3, a whole crowd of people going somewhere Beringer himself had never been. That was more than suspicious. Even if there was a perfectly reasonable explanation, Beringer was justified in checking it out. The worst he would get would be a talking to from whatever senior official was down there. The best he'd get would be a glimpse of what none of his colleagues had ever seen. The 3rd level below the Louvre. Beringer shivered a little and tried to steel himself. He was not a brave man. While fit enough for his late 30s, he hadn't been in a fight since his school days. He told himself that if they were criminals, he'd sneak back to the ground floor and alert security. And where was security, anyway? He opened the door a crack and peeked out. No one. Far below, he heard the buzz and click of an electronic lock opening. Now thoroughly intrigued, Beringer tiptoed down the stairs.